The centrifuge screamed. It was not the familiar, high-pitched hum of a machine operating at peak efficiency, a sound Hamid had come to associate with progress, with national pride, with the defiant roar of a nation asserting its place in the world. This was a shriek of metallic agony, a violent, grinding protest from deep within the concrete-entombed Cascade Hall. Hamid's eyes darted from the triple-paned, reinforced observation window back to his monitor. The screen was an ocean of calm green, all systems nominal. Cascade 17, Siemens S7 control panel, telemetry data stable. Rotor speed, 1064 Hz. Temperature within tolerance. Vibration sensors, silent. But the sound, a physical force leaking through meters of concrete and steel, told a different, terrifying story. It was a dissonant, jagged chord in a carefully composed symphony of advanced engineering. He glanced at his colleague, Reza, whose face was a mask of utter confusion, his brow beaded with sweat despite the controlled climate of the control room. Reza pointed a trembling finger toward the screen. "It says everything is fine. The diagnostics are clear." Hamid tapped the monitor, a useless gesture of primal frustration. The green numbers mocked the chaos unfolding just meters away, a digital lie presented with absolute confidence. The sound was getting worse. A low, resonant thud, then another, sharp and final, like a giant snapping a steel rod over his knee. On the screen, the data remained placid, serene. An alarm klaxon suddenly blared, a jarring, ear-splitting pulse, but it was for a pressure differential in a secondary cooling loop in a different sector. A minor, routine issue, a complete distraction. The real crisis was unannounced, unlogged, utterly invisible to the very system designed with Teutonic precision to prevent it. Hamid felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a visceral reaction to an event that his instruments told him was not happening. For 2 years, this facility at Natanz had been the pinnacle of Iranian science, a fortress of ingenuity shielded from the world. Now, something alien, something impossible, was tearing it apart from the inside. And the only evidence was a sound that should not exist, and a screen that refused to see reality. He didn't know it yet, but he was a witness. He was standing at ground zero of the world's first digital war, the first casualty of a weapon made of pure information. 2 years earlier, in a sterile, soundproofed conference room on the 14th floor of the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, the mood was grim. At the head of the table sat Meir Dagan, the agency's director. Dagan was a man forged in the crucible of Israeli conflict, a former paratrooper and general whose personal history was indivisibly entwined with the state's survival. His maternal grandfather had been murdered in the Holocaust. His parents were survivors from a Polish ghetto. For Dagan, the intelligence portfolio on the table, detailing Iran's accelerating nuclear program, was not an abstract threat matrix. It was an existential echo of a past he had sworn to never allow to be repeated. He didn't see charts and satellite photos of Natanz. He saw a countdown timer to a second Shoah. His operational philosophy, a dagger clutched in a fist, was etched into the agency's DNA. Act, don't react. Create the future, don't be its victim. Across from him sat Brigadier General Nadav Alan, the commander of Unit 8200, Israel's elite signals intelligence corps. Alan was a different kind of soldier, a prodigy of a new, invisible battlefield. His weapon was information, his terrain the electromagnetic spectrum. He was a man who understood that future wars would be won not by tanks rolling across deserts, but by algorithms propagating through silicon. His greatest achievement, still a closely guarded secret, was Operation Orchard. He had overseen the digital mapping of Syria's entire air defense network, creating a phantom corridor that allowed Israeli F-15s to fly completely undetected and drop their payloads on a nascent nuclear reactor at Al-Kibar, a reactor built with North Korean help. He was here because Dagan needed a ghost, a weapon that could strike without leaving a fingerprint, without firing a shot. The third man was Tamir Pardo, Dagan's deputy and heir apparent, a master of the human-centric, high-risk world of clandestine operations. Pardo's specialty was the delicate, dirty art of turning assets, of running agents in the most hostile territories on Earth. He had personally overseen the network that for years had smuggled faulty centrifuge components into Iran's supply chain, a campaign of minor industrial sabotage that was now proving insufficient. He was the master of finding the one crack in a fortress wall. Dagan looked from the hard-nosed general to the cyber warfare prodigy. He needed both their skills, fused into something entirely new, something that had never existed before. He tapped a satellite image of the Natanz enrichment facility. It showed a sprawling complex, partially buried beneath layers of earth and concrete, surrounded by anti-aircraft batteries. The conventional options have failed, Dagan stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Our sources inside their supply chain are being rolled up. The accidents we have arranged are being investigated with increasing sophistication. Sanctions are a slow poison, and they are developing an antidote. The timeline is shrinking. The International Atomic Energy Agency believes they are months, not years, from a viable device if they choose to break out. He paused, letting the crushing weight of the statement settle in the silent room. The Prime Minister has asked for a military option. He wants bombers in the air. Alon shifted in his seat, his analytical mind already running calculations. A strike on Natanz is possible but messy. A strike on Fordo, buried under a mountain near Qom, is not. Not without tactical nuclear weapons. It's a temporary solution that creates a permanent, unwinnable regional war. Dagan nodded slowly. My assessment as well. It's a fool's errand. He turned his gaze fully onto Alon, his eyes like chips of flint. Which is why we are not considering a military option, not a conventional one. The geopolitical chessboard was impossibly complex, a three-dimensional game of threats and deceptions. Publicly, Iran's President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad delivered fiery speeches, insisting the program was for peaceful energy to power a modern nation. Privately, intelligence from defectors and a steady stream of signals intercepts painted a far more sinister picture. A dedicated parallel weaponization effort, codenamed Project Ahmad. The shocking discovery of the Fordo fuel enrichment plant in 2009, secretly built inside a mountain base of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, shattered any remaining illusions of peaceful intent. Fordo was not a power plant facility. It was a military bunker designed for one purpose: enriching uranium to weapons-grade levels, impervious to aerial bombardment. The world powers, led by the United States, enacted increasingly stringent sanctions. But a sophisticated black market for dual-use parts, masterminded by the ghost of the AQ Khan network, flourished. Israeli intelligence watched with growing alarm as Iran's stockpile of low-enriched uranium grew week by week. They watched as their scientists, brilliant and dedicated, mastered the delicate physics of centrifuge operation, overcoming the very obstacles Israel's sabotage efforts had created. Every failed diplomatic overture, every toothless UN resolution, was another tick of the clock. A military strike remained the option of last resort, a blunt instrument with catastrophic, unpredictable consequences. It would ignite the Middle East, send oil prices into the stratosphere, and most importantly, galvanize the Iranian people around their hardline government, turning a regime's ambition into a national crusade. More critically, it wouldn't guarantee success. It would only drive the program deeper underground, making it impossible to track. The problem wasn't destroying a building. It was destroying knowledge, destroying momentum. It was about creating a setback so profound, so technically baffling, that it would instill doubt, paranoia, and deep mistrust into the very heart of the Iranian nuclear establishment. The genesis for the new mission, the one that would change the world, came not from a single event, but from a terrifying convergence of intelligence. A new report from a high-level source within Iran's Atomic Energy Organization, cross-referenced with communications intercepts provided by the American NSA, confirmed that Iran had overcome a major technical hurdle. They were now successfully operating thousands of delicate P1 centrifuges in large, stable, interconnected cascades. Their rate of enrichment had tripled in just 6 months. The theoretical red line, the point at which they would have enough fissile material for a bomb before the world could react, was no longer a distant possibility. It was a statistical probability, projected by Mossad's sharpest analysts, to occur within 18 to 24 months. Dagan convened an emergency session of his senior staff. He laid out the cold, hard facts. Physical sabotage was failing. Diplomacy was stalling. A military strike was strategic suicide. "We need a new weapon," he declared, his fist hitting the table softly. "Something that strikes the program, not the country. Something that rots the fruit from the inside out." He looked directly at General Elan. "Your unit has talked about offensive cyber capabilities, abstract theories, digital war games. I want you to make it real. I want a weapon made of code, a weapon that can cross an air gap and physically destroy their centrifuges. It must be completely deniable. It must be untraceable. It must look like a series of unfortunate accidents." The room was silent. What Dagan was proposing had never been done. It was the stuff of science fiction novels. A digital weapon that caused physical, kinetic destruction. Elan's mind raced through the mountain of impossibilities. The Natanz control network was air-gapped, a sealed digital island with no connection to the outside internet. The industrial control systems were proprietary, a black box manufactured by the German conglomerate Siemens. The weapon would have to be smuggled in physically by a human agent. It would have to hide on the network, identify a hyper-specific target environment, execute its destructive attack, and then meticulously erase its own tracks, all while actively fooling the human operators watching their screens. "It is theoretically possible," Elan said slowly, the words tasting strange in his mouth. "But the resources, the intelligence, the sheer technical scope, it would require a partnership. We cannot build this alone." Dagan knew. He had already made the call. The program was codenamed Olympic Games, and it would be a top-secret joint venture. Unit 8200 would be the architects of the attack. America's National Security Agency, with its near-limitless budget and its secret vault of zero-day exploits, would be the builders. The world's first true cyber superweapon was about to be conceived. The plan in motion began with a single, seemingly insurmountable problem: the air gap. The Natanz control network was a fortress, a sealed island. To get the code onto that island, someone had to physically carry it across the moat. The Joint Task Force, a small, compartmentalized group of the brightest minds from Unit 8200 and the NSA's Elite Tailored Access Operations, TAO, began by digitally mapping the human network surrounding the physical one. They identified every company, every contractor, every supplier who had legitimate access to the facility. The list was long, but after cross-referencing against travel records, financial data, and communications intercepts, it was narrowed to 4 engineering firms responsible for maintaining the sophisticated industrial control systems. One of them, a small Dutch company specializing in industrial automation, became the prime target. Mossad's recruitment division, Caesarea, led by Pardo himself, was tasked with finding a vector. They didn't need a spy in the classic sense. They needed a mule. A willing or perhaps unwitting participant who could carry the payload. After months of painstaking surveillance and vetting of the company's employees, they found their man, an Iranian engineer working for the Dutch firm. He was a dissident, with family who had suffered under the regime after the 2009 election protests. He was motivated by ideology, not money. He was perfect. Pardo's team made the approach in a third country during a routine business trip. The pitch was simple, clean, and carefully crafted to be believable. He was not asked to steal secrets or commit violence. He was told he would be helping to introduce faulty diagnostic software that would subtly disrupt the enrichment process, a form of peaceful protest. The software was on a simple, off-the-shelf USB flash drive. His only task was to insert that drive into his work laptop, the one he occasionally connected to the control systems at Natanz for routine maintenance. The risk was immense, but the target, burning with a desire for change, was convinced. He was given the drive and a sterile communication device for emergency use only. He was now the asset, the unwitting delivery man for the most complex weapon ever created. Back in the secure labs in Tel Aviv and Fort Meade, the coding was a frantic, round-the-clock effort. The weapon, now named Stuxnet by its creators after a combination of file keywords found in its code, was a multi-stage masterpiece of malicious engineering. It was comprised of 3 distinct, revolutionary parts. First, the worm. Its sole job was to spread. To do this, the NSA contributed 4 separate, priceless, zero-day exploits. Secret, unknown vulnerabilities in the Microsoft Windows operating system that no antivirus in the world knew how to stop. Stuxnet could spread through USB drives, through local networks, and even through shared project files for the Siemens software. It was engineered to be relentlessly contagious. To get past security software, the code was digitally signed with a legitimate security certificate stolen from Realtek, a massive Taiwanese hardware company, in a separate, daring cyber heist. It was like having a stolen, authenticated passport. Second, the payload. This was the warhead, the kill vehicle. It was designed to do absolutely nothing unless it found itself in a hyper-specific environment. A computer running Siemens Step 7 software that was connected to a network of S7 315 and S7 417 programmable logic controllers, which in turn were managing a specific number of frequency converters from 2 different manufacturers, Vakon in Finland and Ferraro-Paya in Iran. This was the exact, unique digital fingerprint of the centrifuge control system at Natanz. Anywhere else in the world, on any of the millions of computers it might infect, Stuxnet would remain dormant, a digital sleeper cell waiting for a signal it would never receive. Third, and most brilliantly, the rootkit. This was the key to its ghost-like nature. A typical rootkit is designed to hide the presence of malware from the computer's user. But Stuxnet's rootkit was an offensive weapon. It would intercept the real-time data coming from the centrifuges during an attack and play back a perfect 21-second recording of normal, stable operations to the engineer's console. It was a digital ghost in the machine, showing the operators a perfect world while the payload was actively, physically destroying their most valuable hardware. The weapon was a digital predator, bioengineered for a single, unique prey. But even the perfect weapon has weaknesses. The first setback was a crushing blow. The asset performed his task. The USB was inserted. The worm spread through his company's internal network. But it never jumped the air gap. For weeks, the Joint Ops Center stared at a blank screen. The weapon had failed to reach its target. Frantic intelligence gathering, including the risky reactivation of a low-level human source inside Natanz, eventually confirmed the reason: a recent, unannounced change in security protocols. The contractor laptops, including the assets, were no longer being connected directly to the control system network. A new firewall and procedure had been implemented. The digital bridge was gone. The team in Tel Aviv was furious. They had burned one of their precious zero-day exploits and had nothing to show for it. The Americans at the NSA, always more cautious, were deeply concerned about exposure and argued for aborting the mission. The debate raged for days. Dagon, resolute, made the final decision. They would escalate. The engineers redesigned the worm. Stuxnet 2.0 was more aggressive, more dangerous. It wouldn't just infect the first machine. It would actively seek out any other computer on any connected network that was running the Siemens software and propagate itself, hunting relentlessly for any possible pathway to the centrifuges. This dramatically increased the risk of detection. It was a louder, more reckless approach. Pardo's team had to re-engage the asset. This was the most dangerous phase of the entire operation. His mission was no longer a single, discrete act. He was now tasked with carrying the new, more virulent version of the weapon and finding a new way to introduce it, to get it onto any machine that might eventually touch the Natanz intranet. The psychological pressure on him was immense. He was no longer just a mule. He was an active, conscious infiltrator. Then came the second major complication. A rival intelligence agency, a European partner not read into Olympic Games, detected anomalous network traffic originating from the Dutch contractor during a routine sweep. They didn't know what it was, but they were investigating, their digital forensics teams closing in. The window of opportunity was shrinking from weeks to days. The joint team had to act fast before the entire operation was exposed by a friendly fire incident. The asset reported he had a small window, a planned system-wide diagnostic check in 3 weeks. It would be his only chance. The launch was authorized. It had to work this time. There would be no third attempt. The moment of truth arrived, not with a bang, but with a flicker of data on a screen. In the Joint Operations Center, the air was thick with a tension that was almost physical. At 17 minutes past 10, Tehran time, the first signal arrived. The asset had confirmed insertion. The USB drive, containing the more aggressive version of Stuxnet, was now active in a senior engineer's workstation at the contractor's field office near Natanz. The worm began its silent hunt. For 28 agonizing minutes, there was nothing. Then, a new node appeared on the tracking map. Propagation confirmed. The worm had spread across the contractor's local network, an invisible predator seeking its specific prey. Just after 11:30, a cheer went up in the Tel Aviv-Mead axis of control. The worm had successfully infected the laptop of an engineer scheduled for a diagnostic check inside Natanz's Cascade Hall B the next morning. The weapon was now inside the gates, waiting patiently on the hard drive of a trusted technician. The hours that followed were the longest in the careers of everyone present. Finally, just after 1 in the morning. The engineer inside Natanz connected his laptop to the control network to begin his diagnostics. The digital bridge was down. In that instant, Stuxnet flooded across the air gap. The operators in Tel Aviv and Fort Meade watched, mesmerized, as the code replicated itself with blinding speed, moving silently from one Siemens controller to another, embedding itself deep inside the target's central nervous system. At 1:28 in the morning, Stuxnet began its final check. It sent out a cascade of digital queries, fingerprinting its new environment. Was it the right model of Siemens controller? Yes. Was it connected to frequency converters from Vakon or Ferraro Paya? Yes. Was the network size consistent with a large-scale centrifuge cascade? Yes. 3 minutes later, the screen in the ops center flashed a single word in bold green text. Target confirmed. The payload, the digital warhead, unlocked itself. A moment later, the rootkit engaged, its most critical phase beginning. It began recording 21 seconds of legitimate real-time telemetry data from Cascade 17, capturing the digital signature of a perfectly functioning system. That recording was now armed, a loop of lies ready to be deployed. The attack began. Stuxnet issued its first direct command, bypassing the human operator's console entirely and speaking directly to the frequency converters that controlled the centrifuge motors. The rotors in Cascade 17 were ordered to accelerate, to spin far beyond their design specifications, from their normal speed of 1064 Hz up to a shattering 1410 Hz. Simultaneously, the rootkit activated its playback function. On the control screen in the Natanz control room, Hamid and Reza saw nothing amiss. The pre-recorded loop of stable data fed them a perfect illusion. Their screens showed a rotor speed of a placid 1064 Hz. Everything looked normal. But in the Israeli-American Ops Center, they saw the real data, raw and unfiltered by the rootkit. They saw the centrifuges spinning wildly out of control. Ultra-sensitive microphones, hidden in the facility during its construction by an earlier Mossad operation, picked up the first audible sounds. A high-frequency whine that quickly escalated into a piercing, metallic shriek of distress. At 1:49 in the morning, the first centrifuge failed catastrophically. The delicate aluminum rotor, stretched beyond its physical tolerance by the immense G-forces, shattered. The ops center registered a violent energy spike on their sensors, followed by an abrupt, dead silence from that machine's telemetry. One machine down. The attack immediately ceased. Stuxnet commanded the remaining centrifuges back to normal speed. The entire event had lasted just 15 minutes. To any engineer rushing to the scene to investigate the crash, it would appear to be a single, inexplicable, and isolated mechanical failure. This deadly cycle repeated over the next several weeks. The ghost in the machine would attack, retreat, and hide, switching between the devastating overspeed attack and a second, more insidious underspeed vector that dropped the spin rate to a level that created destructive harmonic vibrations. It targeted different cascades on different days, creating a pattern of chaos that seemed to have no logic. Panic and paranoia gripped Natanz. Entire cascades were shut down. The baffled Iranians brought in German engineers from Siemens itself, who were utterly stumped. Their own diagnostic tools showed a perfectly healthy system. They blamed faulty Iranian manufacturing, bad raw materials, or incompetent operators. Over a period of months, Stuxnet methodically and invisibly destroyed nearly 1,000 centrifuges, almost a quarter of Iran's entire operational capacity. The nuclear program was crippled, not by a bomb, but by a cascade of malicious digital commands. The mission was a staggering, unprecedented success. The immediate fallout was exactly as the planners in Tel Aviv and Fort Meade had hoped. Iran's enrichment capacity plummeted. The program, which had been running with a confident, almost arrogant efficiency, was thrown into utter chaos. Engineers were fired, scientists were interrogated under suspicion of sabotage, and the entire leadership structure was consumed by paranoia and mistrust. They were forced to discard entire batches of newly manufactured centrifuges and reevaluate their entire global supply chain, convinced it had been irrevocably compromised by foreign intelligence. The carefully constructed timeline for a potential weapon was shattered, pushed back by an estimated 2 years, giving diplomats a new lease on life. Dagan and his American partners had achieved the impossible: a surgical, non-lethal strike that accomplished what a massive, bloody bombing campaign could not. Israel and the United States maintained perfect, plausible deniability. No government claimed responsibility. No shots were fired. No laws of war were broken because no one had written them yet. It was the perfect crime. But the echo of the operation, the final, devastating twist in the story, was not part of the plan. Stuxnet was a precision weapon, never meant to leave the confines of Natanz. Its hyper-specific targeting system was its own containment field. But its creators, in their hubris, had made one critical, catastrophic miscalculation. They had programmed the worm to die on a specific date, June 24, 2012. But they hadn't anticipated the simple, unpredictable nature of human behavior. A frustrated engineer at Natanz, trying to diagnose the unending problems, copied data from the infected control system onto a USB drive. He took that drive home and connected it to his personal computer to continue his work. That computer was connected to the internet. The ghost was out of the machine. The weapon was in the wild. Freed from the confines of Natanz, Stuxnet began to spread across the globe. It was discovered in early 2010 not by a major intelligence agency, but by a small, obscure cybersecurity firm in Belarus called Virus Blockada, who were trying to figure out why a client's computers in Iran kept inexplicably rebooting. Once they isolated the code and realized it was something they had never seen before, the digital floodgates opened. It was analyzed by every major security firm on the planet, from Symantec in the US to Kaspersky Lab in Russia. The world's most sophisticated and secret digital weapon was laid bare on a public slab for all to see and reverse engineer. The 4 priceless zero-day exploits it contained were now public knowledge, patched by Microsoft within weeks. The revolutionary techniques it pioneered, using code to cause physical destruction, jumping an air gap, using stolen digital certificates for authentication, became a public blueprint. The operation to prevent nuclear proliferation had inadvertently provided the world with a detailed instruction manual for digital warfare. The legacy of Olympic Games wasn't just a delay in Iran's nuclear program. It was the birth of a new generation of state-sponsored cyber weapons, from Flame and Duke to the Russian code that would later attack Ukraine's power grid and the North Korean malware used to cripple global financial institutions. The very weapon that Mayor Dagan had commissioned to keep a sword from his nation's throat had unleashed 1,000 new, invisible daggers into the world, creating a new, permanent battlefield with no front lines, where every power plant, every hospital, and every home was a potential target. The secret war they started in the silent, sterile labs of Natanz was now everywhere, and it would never end.